Here we go. Lesson 3 of Worrior to Warrior. We are learning how to be a better person from being a worrier to being a warrior. We have some important lessons and topics to discuss this evening. The theme of the course has been to remove or take away our negative emotions because those zap our energy, similar to the wrestler who may be stronger than the opponent, but if he's feeling sluggish, there's no chance he could win. Or if you take a Ferrari versus a beat up Chevy 1965, the Ferrari could be souped up and, strong engine, but if it's out of gas, out of fuel, it can't win either. So the theme of the course was removing the feeling of negativity or the negative emotions. Last week we focused on the feeling of inadequacy and shame, the frustration that comes from that. The previous week we were talking about the imposter syndrome. Tonight we're going to be talking about something that is almost like a carrying card of being Jewish, a card carrying Jew, which is the idea of guilt. So addressing unhealthy guilt. Is guilt ever allowed? Is guilt appropriate? Is it kosher? Or is it inappropriate and unkosher? What is going to be the theme of this evening. We're going to go through a lot of incredible topics within Judaism, within Torah, delving into the Tanya, which has been our guide or study. It's still recording, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. And with that, we'll begin. You ever heard of the Jewish mother that was called for jury duty, and she was the first sent back home, and the reason given is she insisted that she was the guilty one. So lesson 3, rethinking regret, is the topic if you're looking on page 85, addressing unhealthy guilt. So something we could all relate to. The question is we have to put into perspective, when is it normal, when is it appropriate, or is it always inappropriate? And with that, we'll start on page 86. We'll start the lesson with exercise 3. Mentally identify a past choice, and I should assure you that you are not to be sharing this publicly. This is just for yourself to be able to revisit and to be able to anchor the class into something tangible, something real. So think of a time, think of a past choice that has left you with a significant lingering feeling or feelings of guilt. You could write it down there, or you could just think about it. I'm probably not the first person to tell you that we've all made mistakes in life. It comes with the territory of living, of life. That's natural. But the response, the normal response is, I messed up. I feel guilty. There's remorse. There's regret involved. But as we all know, guilty is complex. Guilty is tricky. And the questions we're going to be trying to answer this evening is, number 1, on page 87, how do we differentiate between healthy and unhealthy remorse and guilt? When is it a good type of guilt? And when is it an inappropriate or unhealthy? And number 2, at what point can you forgive yourself and move on? See some eyes, wide eyes. It's obviously a heavy question to answer, and it's in the Tanya. Rita, you have anything to share right now, or is it? Okay, good. But definitely a lot to ponder, right? So the issue with guilt, as many of you can relate with me, is that it's almost like a catch-22. What I mean by that is, let's see it in the text inside. Hello, David. Perfect timing. We're starting. It's actually, and no need to actually know Hebrew, but if you are familiar with Hebrew, if you look at the first word of the text in the Hebrew on page 88, again, no pressure. This is not a Hebrew reading course, but in case you do, right, very good, Rita. The first word of this text is Tanya. So the book that we have been analyzing, last week I referred to it as the book of the struggler, or the book of the Beinoni. That's a word that was a key word from last week. But the book is famously known as Tanya, and it's named that after the first word of the book. So similar to Torah portions, many of the Torah portions in the Torah are named after the first or second word of that Torah portion. So this book is named after the first word of the book, which is Tanya. Tanya means we have studied. It's a Talmudic way of saying look at a text, or to refer to a text that we have studied. So in the opening lines of the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe is addressing this question of guilt. And let's see it inside. We're going to go through a little bit of a contradiction in different parts of the Talmud that the Alter Rebbe is going to be addressing, but there's going to be a point that we're trying to get to. It has been taught. Before birth, each soul is administered an oath. Be righteous and do not be wicked. And even if the entire world tells you that you are righteous, regard yourself as a wicked person. This requires clarification, for it seemingly contradicts the dictum of Ethics of the Fathers that says, do not regard yourself as a wicked person. Furthermore, if you consider yourself wicked, you will be troubled and despondent. That will prevent you from serving God with joy and positive emotion. On the other hand, if you are not at all perturbed by your flaws, you may end up not taking yourself or your actions seriously, God forbid. So the Alter Rebbe begins, just to explain to you what we just read, and it's okay if you didn't get all of it, I'll explain it a little bit outside. The Alter Rebbe begins, like many scholarly books, it begins with a contradiction from two places of the Talmud. In one place it says, an oath is given even before the soul comes into this world, telling the person, you shall be a righteous person. And yet, in Ethics of the Fathers, it says, you should consider yourself to be a wicked person. So that's a contradiction that needs to be solved. But then the Alter Rebbe asks a much deeper question, more philosophical question. And that question is, if you feel guilty, if you do consider yourself like a wicked person, did the wrong thing, and filled with remorse and regret, it's going to zap your energy. How do you serve God with joy if you're in a feeling of guilt? But if you don't feel guilty, which means you're feeling callous and almost careless about the action you did, that's not a good place to be in either. So should you feel guilty or should you not? That's the question, the opening question of Tanya. What's interesting is the Tanya spans 53 chapters. This question is not directly addressed because in truth, the whole Tanya is addressing this question, this catch-22. So tonight's class is going to be about guilt. And that's really the opening question of Tanya, is how do you deal with guilt? You don't want to live life guilty, but you don't want to not feel guilty because then you can feel callous. So that's the catch-22. Oh, we were worried. I saw your husband. I didn't see you come in. I'm glad you're here. Thank you. You lit up the room. Thank you very much both for joining. So, and for the rest of us, don't think you could come late and get such a compliment. That's just a one-time exception. I'm kidding. It's great to see you. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to go through a 4-word text, unless someone wants to read the 4 words. It's Hebrew. It's 4 words. I think in English it's 5 or 6 words. I want your perspective of what you think it means. It's from the wisest of people. His name was King Solomon. And he says this word: in every sadness, there is a benefit. B'chol etzev yiyeh meiser. How do you understand this verse? Is sadness or this negative emotion of guilt, is King Solomon saying it's a good thing? There's a benefit, or is he saying it's a bad thing? How do you understand this quote from Solomon? David, how do you understand page 89, text 2?
Well,
good thing or bad thing?
good.
There's a benefit, right? Does everyone agree? Yeah, that's the usual way of understanding it. That sadness.
If it was said the reverse, every benefit versus sadness, and that would be negative.
Beautiful. Okay, good. So the Alter Rebbe learns this same verse. All of us, most of us would understand it. It's a benefit. The Alter Rebbe is saying, look at the words. It's saying that there is a benefit, which means that the sadness itself is not a good thing. But if you're in a feeling of sadness, you should know that there is a benefit that it should lead you to. But in and of itself, it's not a good thing. In every sadness, there is a benefit, which implies that on its own, it's not a good thing. Do you see that? So let's just, you understand? Does that make sense, Jennifer? Okay, so I just want
More
to,
sense.
okay, good. So I just want to bring us up this on the screen, make sure there's actually quite a lot of slides that or points that we're going to be going through on the screen as well. So guilt is tricky. And the catch-22 that I was saying before is, if I feel guilty, it's bringing you down. You're in a place of negative feelings. But if you're not feeling guilty, the Tanya opens with a question, you're lacking accountability. You're feeling callous. So we know from a previous lesson that positive emotions can be bad. The example I gave is if there's someone that you can't stand and he gets fired from his job, you could celebrate, you feel happy. That's a positive emotion, but it's morally an incorrect thing. So positive emotions can be bad, or feeling lustful, God forbid, on someone else's spouse. It's a feeling of a positive feeling, or you're in love, but it's with the wrong person. It's a bad feeling to have, right? I could give you more examples, but we've done that in a previous lesson. But the question we're going to be addressing this evening is the reverse. Can there be something good in a negative feeling? So previously we were positive emotions we established can be bad, but what about the reverse, which is, can negative emotions be good? And that's what King Solomon is addressing, or the Alter Rebbe is addressing from King Solomon. And the way the Alter Rebbe is understanding, the negative emotion on itself is not good. It could zap your energy, but it could lead to a benefit. So to give you an example, this is quite a strong example, but it's one that's on my mind, and I'll tell you why as well. The example I have is if you see a person holding a scalpel and they're cutting out someone's heart. It sounds terrible, right? It is terrible. That means the person on the table is not going to survive. But that heart, exactly, it could be a heart transplant that is also helping someone save someone else's life. So obviously, in and of itself, is a terrible thing, but it could have a benefit and save someone's life. The reason why this is on my mind, there's this incredible picture. Tragically, there was a family, a mother and two of her young daughters that were killed while driving in Israel. Many of you saw that in the news. And so the mother, her heart was donated to another person, another Jewish person living in Israel. And there's this incredible moment where the siblings, the surviving siblings, are meeting the recipient and holding on to their mother's heart. It's a bitter, I don't know how to explain that moment, but that I just read that recently, and therefore the example of that's the example. It's maybe I don't know how appropriate it is. Everyone maybe grab a piece of cake. Let's lighten the mood after that. There's
Touched her heart.
no. Like they put their hand. They felt the beating. I'm sorry if I no. They felt the beating heart. Sorry, maybe I should have explained that a little better. So what we're going to be addressing is there's a value in the benefit derived from a place of sadness, from a place of guilt. In and of itself, it's not a good thing, but it could lead you to a good place. Now the question is, when is it a good thing? When is it an appropriate place? So let's look, and that's going to be one of the main things that we're going to be dealing with. If you don't mind looking with me on page 89, text number 3, this is actually taken from the Tanya addressing this verse of King Solomon, where he says the following: in every sadness there is benefit, which is from King Solomon, implies that there is benefit and gain to be derived from negative emotions. But the phraseology actually suggests that negative emotions per se have no virtue, and it is only that a benefit is derived from them. So there is value at times in negative emotions, but they're not the goal unto themselves. The goal is the gain that follows. Is that clear from that King Solomon? Okay, cool. Now, a couple of years ago, Vivian, you were there. I don't know if the burgers, I don't know if you were there, but before COVID, so I don't know if anyone remembers that we lived a good life before COVID. But in, I think, 2018 or 2019, we had a rabbi. His name is Rabbi Marcus. He's a colleague of mine from San Mateo. He authored an incredible translation and commentary on the book of Psalms. And he gave here to talk about his book and talk about the book of Psalms. And one of the questions he answered was, out of the 150 Psalms, which one is your favorite?
and this is a scholar, an expert in Psalms. So which one's your favorite? I didn't think of the question long enough, but the famous answer would be chapter 23. I lie down in green pastures. Even if I walk in the valley of shadow of death, God is with me. I fear no evil. It's a famous one that many of us, unfortunately, have been to many funerals and therefore know it by heart. But he answered chapter 126, because there's a verse in there that says, if you look at text 4, those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Hazorim bedima, berina yiksayu, which kind of means if there's no pain, there's no gain. So you put in the hard work, you sow with tears, you'll reap with joy, you'll see the benefit, you'll see the result. So in the sadness in itself, there's no joy. That's not a good place. But the result, there could be incredible gain. What's amazing, and always when I teach bar mitzvah lessons, it's so fun trying to explain to a 12, 13-year-old why it is that Judaism is opposite than the rest of the world, that our day starts at night. So we know that when the Shabbat starts, in the evening, after sundown, right? We light the candles right before sundown. Yom Kippur starts at night. Our day starts at night. So if someone was born, like my Yassi was born right after sundown or right before sundown, that would be, it's like the midnight in the rest of the world. When is his birthday? For Jews, it's sundown. That's the deciding moment. And that's because in the Torah, when God created the world, in the opening verses of the Torah, the way God created the world, after each day it says, and there was evening and there was morning, day one. There was evening, there was morning, day two, right, Ken? So what we learned from there is the day starts at night, because God prefaced in the verse, there was evening before there was morning. But the deeper lesson that I love to impart in these young children is that even when it feels like evening, the Torah is telling us there will be morning. There's always the sun that's going to rise at the end. Meaning you put in the hard work, you'll see the blessings and the results. You may not see it at the beginning. In that sadness, there's nothing good as a goal unto itself, but there is the result that is beneficial. Make sense? Any questions? So the question that I have for you on page 90 is, what benefit might be gained from negative emotions? That's the question. I know. I got the sigh. It's a good one. Yeah, I would love to hear, for sure. Accountability. Is that what do you mean, accountability?
Let's say, okay, you feel guilt. Let's say you
and you know what, hold on, David. Could everyone hear David on Zoom? If not, I'll repeat it.
Let's say you're walking in the street and you see a man in front of you, and his wallet falls out of his pocket. And instead of running to pick it up, you pick it up yourself and goes with the cash and everything. Then you've got, for a while, you say, wait a minute, that's not right. I should be guilty. So he could correct that with accountability. It says, wait a minute.
So the guilt leads to accountability, or
yes.
That's the benefit
of going to accountability.
Okay.
Now, I don't know if that's
the
whole purpose of this call.
So we're going to get a lot deeper than that, David. I love that answer, and that's really good. And we're gonna delve into the point of the class, and from here really till the end of the evening, is to address that guilt can lead to a positive, but there's a lot of structure and rules that have to be in place. Otherwise, it's inappropriate and has to be dropped, because guilt could be a very toxic place to be. A person could live in a place of guilt, regret decisions that they've made or regret things that have happened, and they can never get themselves out of it. And that's that's toxic. But there are times when it could be beneficial. When it is beneficial and when is it not? And when is it the wrong thing and therefore has to be dropped because there's no benefit? That's going to be the theme of tonight's evening, and that's going to be the structure. We're going to constantly build the rules, the parameters of when it's good and when it's not. Clear? All right, let's delve right in. So at the risk of stating the obvious, it's a very Jewish thing to feel guilty. If it's done properly, it can be good. It brings us benefit, as we just learned from King Solomon. So let's start with the basics. So this is a famous Maimonides. This is taken from the laws of Teshuvah. And Ken, if you remember last week, was it last week or 2 weeks ago, you were talking about free choice. right? Was that something that was last week or 2 weeks ago? I don't remember. But over here in this Maimonides, he's the Rambam is going to be addressing that point, and we're going to make a really good point out of it. So text number 5 reads as follows. Free will is granted to all humans. Should we desire to tread the path of goodness and be righteous, the choice is ours. Should we desire to turn to the path of evil and be wicked, the choice is ours. Do not entertain the view held by the fools of the nations and the majority of simple-minded Jews that from the moment of a human's conception, God decrees whether that person will be righteous or wicked. This is untrue. Rather, each individual can become righteous like our teacher Moshe, or wicked like a wicked king whose name was Yeravam. We can embrace wisdom or foolishness, be merciful or cruel, miserly or generous. The same is true of all character traits. No one compels, dictates, or leads us toward any of these paths. Rather, we, of our own initiative and decision, veer to the path of our choosing. This is implied by the prophet Jeremiah, who stated, neither evil nor good emerged from the mouth of the one above, meaning that the Creator does not decree on a person whether they will be righteous or evil. Consequently, those who do wrong have no one but themselves to blame. It is therefore proper to cry and mourn over our moral failings and the damage we have inflicted upon our souls. This is implied by the following verse. What should rightfully aggrieve a person? His sins. It's a pretty heavy-duty text touching on the theme of the free choice that is given to us, but also the idea of teshuvah, or more importantly, that when a person wronged another or wronged God, they should feel the remorse and the regret or guilt over what they did. Unlike shame, which we learned about last week, that is always inappropriate. Guilt could be perfectly appropriate. And therefore, what the Rambam is saying is there's no excuse for the poor choices that we have made. You should feel guilty and correct them. But what the text also provides, and we're going to do an exciting exercise, I would love to hear your answers. When is it legitimate from a Torah or Jewish perspective, which is what you came to learn from, and when is it inappropriate? That feeling of guilt, and when is it not appropriate? Exercise 3.2. How appropriate is guilt as a response to the following scenario? So you have 5 scenarios. It shouldn't take long because it's really your gut feeling. 1 means it's very appropriate to feel guilty. Somewhat appropriate is 2. Not at all, which means it's inappropriate, is number 3. Number 4 would mean, I don't know, complicated. It depends. That would be number 4. So 1 to 4. I will be reviewing them in a moment, but you're welcome to fill them out. And for the sake of the recording, in case someone doesn't have the book, I will also repeat them. Okay, here we go. Mother's Day was yesterday. You forgot to buy your mother or wife flowers. Should you feel guilty? You could exchange that one for the first one, which is forgetting a spouse's birthday. Now, they for sure will make you feel guilty. But the question over here is, should you feel guilty for forgetting your spouse's birthday? 1, totally. 3, no. 4, maybe. Depends. Why would it depend?
Because if you just had a baby, you'd be too busy and you might forget.
Got it. Okay. So are you able to, were you able to hear Elizabeth? It looks like not. Yeah, were you able to hear Elizabeth? Okay, so it seems that you can't, and therefore I'll just repeat. Elizabeth said it depends on the circumstance. There's times when you're very busy or involved in a very important thing like having a baby, and you can't be expected to remember your spouse's birthday. Rita, were you going to share something on that? No? Anyone else? Okay, right now we're just taking suggestions. Texting, this is a really important one. Texting while driving and rear-ending another vehicle. Should you feel guilty?
Yes.
1. Anyone saying not? And Mandy, I'll take your questions right after this exercise. Okay, number 3, missing a child's graduation due to a medical emergency. Okay. So 3. Everyone says 3 on that one? Ken, what did you write for that one? 4? It's complicated. Okay.
Oh, no, no.
Okay. And if anyone else wants a pen or pencil, I have one for you. Is anyone on Zoom wanting to answer any of these? I would love to hear. Wasting, this is a good one. Wasting years of life as a result of choosing a dead-end career. You're not it's complicated? Okay.
Yeah, I picked 4.
Okay, make sure. I think our mic just switched. Could everyone hear me on Zoom still?
Yes, it was stuck for a second.
Yes? Okay,
Yes.
good. You can hear me, yeah? Okay. What did you guys write for eating unhealthy?
I
Ken
put
would've
2.
known. That's a good answer. You put a 4, it's complicated, okay. Just making sure, someone give me a thumbs up just to make sure you guys can hear me. Robin, are you able to hear me? Oh, good, okay, fine. Befriending a person, this is a really important one. Befriending a person who eventually causes harm to one's family. I'll give you an example. You have a friend, you invite them over, they meet your brother-in-law and sister, and they start a business partnership, all thanks to you connecting them. And it comes out that the guy was a crook, and he took your sister and brother-in-law's business down the drain or stole their money. Or you have a friend that was looking for a job, and your mother needed help around the house because she's elderly, and they come over, and it comes out that there was a terrible elder abuse, but you're the one that made that connection. Should you feel guilty? No. So that's 3. Even though you're the one that you didn't do it on purpose. Okay. Key point over there. Didn't do it on purpose. And so texting while driving, you did it on purpose. Eating unhealthy. It's complicated. Got it. Okay. Okay, but we're making some good headway here. I love the feedback. So anyone on Zoom want to give their answer to, let's say, the last one, befriending a person? Let's see, Evelyn, I have you here first. Do you want to answer anything for that one? Oh, you're muted. Sorry. I think it's an automatic mute. There you go. Yeah.
I marked 1.
Oh, wait, hold on 1 second. You are not muted, but my speaker changed. 1 second. Okay, try now, Evelyn. Sorry.
I marked 1.
No, I still can't hear you. Hold on 1 second, Evelyn. It's my fault.
Well.
I should feel very guilty.
Guilty, yeah.
Okay, test it now. Try now.
I marked number 1.
No, still not working. Sorry, Evelyn. Give me one more moment. Speaker.
Some new people there.
There we go. I just figured it out. All right, try.
I marked number 1.
Oh, okay. Awesome. So you should feel very guilty for that. It's very appropriate to feel guilty on that. Okay. Interesting.
I will amend to say, I think I would feel terribly guilty, but I think I shouldn't.
Okay. So that's a beautiful answer. Jennifer added or amended her statement that she would feel guilty, but she shouldn't. Yes? Okay, got it.
Ideally.
Number 2 out of that.
You put number 2, meaning a little bit.
Well, you made the referral, so you should feel some guilt about it, but you couldn't know everything.
Right.
Well,
Okay.
I think it's
You did it up. Okay, and Naomi's saying complicated.
because you may not have any idea that this person is.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay.
I'm good.
Awesome. Okay, this is great. You made a bad choice. We're going to be analyzing the Rambam, the text of Maimonides from 900 years ago that we just read. You made a bad choice. So if you make a bad choice, and we're going to go through all 5 in a moment, but let's just get the bigger idea. If a person made a bad choice, it's fitting that you feel remorse over your choice you made. So we could formulate the following rules of guilt. One is guilt appropriate or the right thing, it's over intentional bad choices. Texting while driving was a choice that you made. That's a choice that you made. Or not eating healthily is a choice that you made. And therefore, guilt over there is appropriate, or it's very appropriate. That would be a number one. But two, number two would be when it's appropriate, but to a lesser degree, would be if it's negligent or lack of proper planning, like forgetting a spouse's birthday. You should feel some guilt because you were negligent in not planning correctly. But then there's the area where guilt is entirely inappropriate. And that's not over it's something that you didn't do intentionally, and I want to make it a little clearer. It has nothing to do with the choice that you made. It has to do with the result that came. And that's out of your hands. The result of something is not something you could hold yourself accountable for or guilty for. For example, you did a lot of research for which school is the best for your daughter. You went around to colleges with her, and you found the one that you think is right, and you encourage your daughter to sign up for medical school, let's say, and it comes out that she failed all her tests, and she learned that medicine is not her forte, and all 2 years of her life were wasted. But that's not from your bad your decision. That's from the result. It could have been, but you, the person helping them, shouldn't feel guilty. We're not going to go in wasted life over here. Over here, it's about the feeling bogged down by a person over the advice they gave for someone else that came out to be the wrong choice, or the connection you made for taking care of an elderly person that came out the guy was a crook. If you did your due diligence and you really researched properly, and it comes out, it seems like this person was an honest, good person, and it came out only after that, no, they weren't, you can't hold yourself accountable for that type of behavior. Does that make sense?
I think you have to ask yourself how reasonable your decision is or was. You know, would a reasonable person have made the same decision you made? If a reasonable person would have, then you should not feel guilty. If you made a decision no reasonable person would ever make, then there's a problem.
Right, meaning, so you should have done your proper due diligence and speak it over, or yeah, if a person is coming from a place of negligence or carelessness and not making a reasonable choice, absolutely. But if they made the reasonable choice in helping their child find the right school, or if you missed your graduation because of a medical emergency, the choice wasn't a bad choice. The result, you wish you could have attended, you couldn't have, but you can't blame yourself. You can't have a guilty feeling for the bad choice, for the choice that you made, because the choice wasn't a bad choice. So if the choice was a bad choice, like texting while driving, then guilt is the appropriate place to be, and we'll have to continue that. So that's the rule of thumb. Again, just to explain, if you look at figure 3.1a, and the reason why it's 1a is because we're going to be building more lines to this figure. So remorse is valid if it's over a faulty decision or a faulty choice. If it's over a faulty result, then remorse and guilt is inappropriate. It's not the right feeling to have, because you can't hold yourself accountable. It's inappropriate. It's totally out of your control. Okay, let's just make sure our screens are up to, so this was from the Rambam, free will is granted. So here's just basically the summary that I just wanted to give. Appropriate guilt, if you're looking at your your exercise with the 5 options, appropriate guilt is it's the right thing. Guilt is appropriate if it's over intentional bad choices. To a lesser degree, or would be the number 2 that you circled, if it's over negligence, bad planning for your spouse's birthday, etc. But when it's not appropriate, and this is a very important point for all of us to know, when is guilt appropriate and when is it not appropriate, is if it's over an honest mistake. You made a connection between this person and your brother, and it came out he was a swindler. But as Robin was saying, if it was a reasonable place to be and the reasonable choice to make, and the result came out bad, or you planned you planned the perfect wedding for your daughter, and the date was circled a year in advance, and you hired the band, and it comes out that it was raining on that day, could you feel guilty for choosing that day? No, it was September. It was a perfect, as long as it wasn't Shabbos or a holiday, it was the perfect day for a wedding. You're not God. You don't know what the weather is going to be like. You could be empathetic. You should be able to sympathize with them, but to feel guilty, that's the wrong place. That is inappropriate. Make sense?
Yeah.
So again, faulty decision, then appropriate to have guilt. If it's a faulty result, guilt is not the right place to be. But now let's not condense, but let's filter this a little more. When is it appropriate or not? If we continue on text 6, it's actually rereading the same text of text 3. It's on page 95, but we want to we're analyzing it a little more. And in every sadness, there is benefit implies that there is benefit. And it's basically, let's read it again. There is benefit and gain to be derived from negative emotions, but the phraseology actually suggests that negative emotions per se have no virtue, and it is only that a benefit is derived from them. So just one extra line I want to add from the Tanya is that benefit. What is the benefit? The benefit is the true joy in God that follows genuine anguish. That's the continuing verse of the Tanya. So analyzing this passage, we should come to the following conclusions. It needs to lead the place of guilt, even if it is the appropriate time to have guilt, it has to lead to a place of increased joy. That is the benefit. When we said that in every sadness there is a benefit, what is the benefit? It has to lead you to a place of increased joy. Or let's just use a better term for that, a positive emotion. If it's legitimately over a faulty choice, a positive emotion comes as a result of it, and we'll explore that a little more. It leads you to a place of greater joy.
What does it mean, true joy in God?
We'll get to the end of the class. If it's not answered, Mrs. Berger, Naomi, let me know, okay? Then number 2, it has to be genuine anguish. What that means is, let's just look at that line again. It has to be a genuine anguish. How do you guys understand the genuine anguish?
You're really sorry that you
What
picked the
page
day
is
and it
that?
rained.
Oh, it's on page 95 for the last line of text number
Nothing
6.
Oh, yeah, I see it, yeah.
You feel
That's what I was
You feel
after,
terrible.
true joy in God.
Or sad.
Okay. So it has to be, so what it means, genuine anguish, there's certain things, there's certain emotions that it's not appropriate to have it, and therefore no matter how genuine it seems or feels, it's wrong. One of them is anger. Anger is never an emotion that should be genuine. Genuine anguish is you are thoroughly allowing that feeling because you want to change. So it's genuine in the motivation that you want to be in a better place. There are certain things, we have all types of feelings. It doesn't mean you have to let all those feelings in. There's a beautiful story of a Hasidic master who had many, many disciples. These were themselves great rabbis, experts in Talmud, etc. And one of them had a struggle. He was constantly bogged down by these inappropriate thoughts that were just coming into fantasies and feelings that were just taking him over, and he didn't know what to do with them. So he went to his teacher, and he was very honest, and he says, how do I battle these? And he says, oh, that's a very good question. And I suggest you go to the neighboring town. One of our disciples, one of our colleagues lives there. Ask him that question. He knows the answer. So he goes to that town. The home belonged to a person by the name of Zusha of Anipoli, a small shtetl in Ukraine, I think. And he knocked on the door to ask him the question. It was Friday afternoon. He wanted to even spend Shabbos with him. And the guy didn't answer the door. He knew there was people inside there because he heard it was Shabbos, Erev Shabbos. So he heard the preparations, he heard the children taking baths, he heard setting up the table, but they just weren't opening the door. And then, no choice, it was time for services, and he went to the nearby synagogue. And at the end of services, his friend who lived in that home says, "So nice to see you. What brings you to the town?" And he's like, "Why don't you answer the door? I came over to you. The first thing I did, I came to town." And he was like, "Oh, what was do you have a very important question?" He says, "Yeah, our Rebbe sent me to you to ask you what do you do with negative feelings that are coming in, that are taking you over?" And he says, "Well, you already got your answer. You knocked and I didn't answer. I just didn't let you in." So a person may have these negative feelings knocking on your internal door. It doesn't mean that every knock on the door you have to answer. So a person can have many negative feelings. That doesn't mean they're genuine. Pride is not a genuine a place that you anger is another one that I mentioned before. But guilt, if it's coming from a genuine place, that's the Alter Rebbe's words, a genuine anguish, then it could be appropriate as long as it's over the results of our choices that we made, the decision, not the results. And B, let's just go a little more. Just one more conclusion. It has to lead to a positive change. Guilt that you are feeling has to have a result that is positive. It has to lead you to a place of joy. That was the words of the Tanya. And it also has to lead to a positive result.
Rabbi,
Yes.
my guilt is around people that are dead. How can I make it up?
So I was sure that question would come up. And I would say, not to put a huge plug for a previous course, but we did finish a course. And Evelyn, I wasn't expecting, you shouldn't feel guilty for not coming to it. It was, you were taking care of your mom. This was in the fall season. And Evelyn's dear mother, Hilda, who was an incredible friend, personally to me, to my family, and to our community, passed away on December 30th. And we finished the course, I think, like 2 weeks before then. But we gave a course called Journey of the Soul, and talking about that connection between the deceased and the people, the living in the family. And we did touch on that question of how do you right a wrong, or how do you help yourself get out of that place of negativity, negative feelings, or guilt over someone who has passed. And there is a method to it. I'm not going to answer the question at length now. And Evelyn, I would love if we can sit down, and I would love to talk to you about it, because it's a very, very important question. But the answer is yes, we can and should remove that feeling of guilt, A, because it's what your loved ones would want, and B, because, as we'll see in tonight's class, guilt shouldn't be the goal. The goal is to get out of the guilt, and we have to graduate from it. There has to be a positive change that's coming. So even if it's to a person that has passed, you still have, one of the themes of my previous course was the soul doesn't die. The connection is still there, even deeper than before, because the soul is eternal. And now it's not limited in a confines of a body. So there's actually a law, and I'm not going to spend too much more time answering the question, but Evelyn, I definitely want to discuss this further with you, is if a person, talking about a business colleague, you cheated someone and you were partners in a business, and you cheated them, and the person, before you were able to right the wrong, the person had a heart attack and died. What do? There is a law that you go to that person's grave with a minion,
Wow.
and you ask for forgiveness. There's a process, and we could talk about it. It's not really the theme of tonight, and I want to respect everyone's time and make sure we get through this evening. But there is a process, and for another time we could talk it more at length, Evelyn. But that's a very important question. And I just want to get through this one point. I just want to make sure it's clear that we're narrowing the parameters of appropriate remorse. So we said, yes, there are times that remorse is appropriate, but when is it appropriate? If you look now on 96, or just look on the screen for a moment to make sure we're getting through the slides. If it's over a morally faulty choice, if it's productive, which means the goal is not the guilt. The goal is to bring you to a place of joy and to bring you to a better, to a positive emotion, and to change, leads to positive change, meaning the person's character has to also be changed as a result of the guilt. That's when guilt is appropriate. If it's not going to change you, what was the point of it? you know, Rita, you heard this in Adina's Torah and T class, and I guess Naomi, you also did, but there was the parrot,
Oh, that's.
that there was a parrot that was I don't know the appropriate way to say it, but it had foul language. It was a terrible pet to the owner. It was always having a bad attitude. It was never happy, and it was always saying bad words. And the owner was, what type of parrot is this? And it yelled at it, it punished it, it kept it in the cage for longer. Nothing seemed to work. So the person scooped up his parrot, stuck it in the freezer. And at the beginning, the parrot is ecking and becking and cursing and screaming. After 10 seconds, the parrot is quiet. Wanting to make sure that he didn't kill his parrot, he opens the freezer. And the parrot is like what we would say in Yiddish, a little tatala. The most pure, genuine, kind, respectful, and saying, I apologize for all the wrongdoings I have done. I promise never to do them again. I will go with you to synagogue. I will sing with you Shalom Aleichem on Shabbat. I'll do everything you ask. And the person is like shocked. And he's about to ask the parrot, like, what made you change? And the parrot asked, before anything else, I have to ask you, what did the chicken do? Okay, you got it?
Yeah.
Okay. You didn't get it, I can speak to you after, I can explain. But so it has to have a positive change, not like sticking it in a freezer, but it has to lead to a better place. Now let's see, Maddie, I know you had a question, and you could read that along on figure 3.1b on 96. Maddie, let's hear it. Oh, you're muted, Maddie, if you're trying to speak.
Oh,
Okay.
yes.
Oh, yes,
It
go ahead.
wasn't, it wasn't so much a question. It was just, I really, really love on page 92 where it says, it's therefore proper to cry and mourn over our moral failings and the
Yeah.
damage we have inflicted upon our souls. I've never thought about it like that, to really take that, to be accountable for the damage that we are inflicting upon our soul when we do, when we do wrong, or if we have like this guilt. It's actually hurting our soul. And I just think that's so deep. And I just absolutely love that. I just wanted to just say that out loud because
Awesome.
it's taking responsibility for
Right,
ourselves. And,
right. But it's
you know.
also the beauty of that, Maddie. First of all, that's amazing. In Hebrew, that's called teshuvah, right? But the beauty
Yes.
of teshuvah is not to linger in that place of crying. It's to allow yourself to make amends and actually be stronger. When a person, the famous example in the Tanya is if a person has a rope, which let's say is considered my connection with God. A person could do things that almost like severs their connection. But when they are remorseful in what they chose to do, and they want to make amends, what happens is they make a knot, they reattach that rope, and they're making a knot. What happens is when you make a knot, the rope is stronger than it was before. And number two, the rope is shorter than it was before. So in that relationship, whether it's interpersonal, between people, if there was a mistake made and you come to that place of true regret, guilt, or remorse, and a place of proper teshuvah, or in your relationship with God, you could actually be in a stronger place in our relationship. But we're going to have to talk about when is it appropriate. What I mean by that is not always appropriate to just be languishing and crying. You're trying to get through your workday and you can't get out of bed. So we have to continue the parameters of when is guilt appropriate. We know it's appropriate if it's over a faulty choice, and it's there to be productive, which means it's to lead to a positive emotion, and it's to lead to a positive change in you. But now we're going to continue to crystallize it, or we have to make sure we have moral clarity. That's going to be what I want to make sure we get to. So we're going to skip a little bit. If you go to page 100, and this would be text number 8 now. This is from Isaiah, where he says, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who present darkness as light and light as darkness, who regard bitter as sweet as bitter. One of the most dangerous things is for people who are sick to not know that they are sick, or know that they are sick and they don't care, and they consider themselves to be just fine. They're unhealthy, and they are considering themselves to be fully healthy, or they're. I'm not going to analyze or talk about it too much, but what I want to make sure is there are times when the guilt you are feeling
is totally toxic.
Totally what?
It's totally toxic. It's a toxic feeling to the point where it's even worse. The feeling that you have could actually be worse than the thing that you did. So you did something morally wrong, but the guilt that you are feeling as a result of it is even worse than the thing you did, because the feeling, the guilty feeling, will make you feel so bad and regret what you did, and it ends up leading into a vicious cycle where you commit it again, or you feel that I felt guilty over it, I'm righteous now, and then you don't change anything, and then you do it again. Now it's called a vicious cycle, and I just want to explain this a little more. In us, remember I spoke to you about the divine soul, the selfless, purpose-oriented soul, and then the self-oriented soul, the soul that is all about oneself, that leads you to make bad decisions because it's coming from a place that's very, very self-oriented. That is also part of the Yetzer Hara. Yetzer Hara would mean, has anyone heard of the term Yetzer Hara? Yetzer Hara would be the Yiddish term of it, would mean the evil inclination. It's that voice that's getting you to do the wrong thing. That person hurt your feelings, you yell back. That person bothered you, you show your irritation to them. That's the feeling that you want to diffuse yourself. You're in an angry mood. You're going to let it loose. That's the evil inclination. Now, the evil inclination, or the Yetzer Hara, the biggest prize for the evil inclination is not even the sin that it entices you to commit. The biggest prize, or the biggest win, I would say, for the Yetzer Hara is the feeling of guilt that you have as a result. So therefore, the parameter, we have to make sure it's very defined, because other ways it's not coming from a virtuous, righteous place, it's actually coming from a Yetzer Hara place. So if you look at text 9, more than the misdeed itself, the evil inclination values the negative emotion that results from the misdeed. More than the misdeed is the negative emotion, the guilt that's coming from the misdeed. It hopes that this negative emotion will lead the person to enter a state of despondency. Now, when we're in a state of despondency, it has you right where it wants it, right where it wants you. And that's where it could get you to do another sin, because you're feeling numb or you're feeling despondent. We all know that when a person is on a diet and they take their first scoop of their first spoonful of ice cream, the worst is the feeling that comes after that scoop of ice cream, after the first spoonful, because that feeling you have will make you eat the rest of the tub. So it's not the spoonful, it's the feeling you have as after that will keep the Yetzer Hara's wheels turning and getting you. Or if you look at the next text, I found this to be very powerful. This is from the 4th Chabad Rebbe. He was known as the Rebbe Maharash. His name was Rabbi Shmuel. And he says like this, I really appreciated this text. The evil inclination is called the animal soul, not because it necessarily behaves like a brute animal at all times. At times, it is a fox, the most cunning of beasts, and great wisdom is needed to see through its machinations. At other times, it disguises itself in the garb of a righteous person, sincere, humble, and of refined character. Always bear in mind and hold dear the following golden rule. If there is a course of action that is productive or leads to a positive action, any opposition to it, even if it is seemingly sourced in a most noble intention, is merely a scheme of the animal soul. That last paragraph I found to be very powerful. If the remorse is not productive, it might make you feel noble, but it's coming from the natural, or over here the term is more the animalistic soul inside of us. At times, the Yetzer Hara is like a fox. It's cunning, it's sly, it knows how to get you. It's not always going to do it by putting on the face of evil. Sometimes it puts on the face of a pious one. That you're in the middle of prayer and comes this voice and saying, why should you be praying now? Go run and give charity to someone. Where is that voice to go run and give charity coming from? Is it really a positive place? Right now you're in the middle of praying. Where's that voice coming from? So it may seem noble, but right now you're in the middle of doing something productive. Don't stop it to go to something else. So just to define this point again, moral clarity is vital. A lot of times we confuse the feeling of healthy guilt with a toxic level of a negative feeling of guilt that is actually harmful, and therefore we need to be so careful. So here's where, let's see text number 11 now. How do we know when it's the right thing? So now I just said sometimes guilt is wrong and it's toxic. The question we have to ask ourselves is, when is it right and when is it wrong? Let's see if that's on the screen. How does one distinguish between productive and unproductive guilt? So let's go back into Tanya, same chapter, which is 26. And the Alter Rebbe will answer that question for us. So this is going right back in the text. Even, is that what page?
Text 11.
Yeah, text 11 on page 103, right? You got it? Okay, good. Even while involved in commerce or other mundane matters, if we experience negative emotions or worry regarding spiritual matters, we must know that this is a ploy of the evil inclination. Its goal is well known, to subsequently lure us into following in its lustful desires, God forbid. Were it not so, how does genuine remorse, which is derived from love or fear of God, come to us in the midst of our mundane activities? So what Alter Rebbe is saying is there's a ploy of the evil inclination. And yeah, let's see. We are in a place of remorse. It could seem to be righteous and productive, but in actuality, it's sourced from the natural soul and it's toxic. Let's see. So we're going to get to the video, and I want to clarify it. Thank you very much, Naomi. Let's see. The result of misguided remorse. If it's we haven't yet distinguished it, but we're trying to distinguish when is it a correct or incorrect remorse. The result of a misguided remorse leads a person to a place of despondency or despair.
What does it mean to say?
And that's the real goal of the evil inclination. It wants to bring you more than the misdeed, is actually the feeling of despair that comes as a result of it. So how does one distinguish? Just want to make sure I'm caught up over here.
Yeah, he is frozen.
Oh, sorry. Is something frozen? Let's see. I'm just going to go a little further. I just want to catch ourselves up to the slides. How does one distinguish between productive and unproductive guilt? If it's productive guilt, when is it productive? If it's over our past poor choices. Like we said before, not over a result. It has to be over a choice that was...
Rabbi, you're frozen.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You probably can't hear us either.
Oh, I can hear you.
Guilty for being frozen. Rabbi, we can't hear you because you froze. Can I just ask, when it says evil inclination, is that talking about the animal soul? Is that what that is?
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Yes, they go hand in hand. Exactly.
Right. Got it.
So the productive, when is it a productive type of guilt? It's over our legitimate remorse over our past choices. When is it unproductive? If it's the ploy of the evil inclination. So now that's where we're going to have to analyze. And this is the Alter Rebbe is going to say an incredible point over here. When is that feeling of guilt or remorse coming to you? If you're in the middle of mundane acts, it's not the right time for these thoughts to be coming in. Because where is it coming from? What's the point of it at that moment? If it's coming in a place involved in holy acts, it is an appropriate place. For the next few minutes, we're going to be analyzing this. We'll be using a video that's going to analyze it. But first, in order to answer when is it appropriate, why at the workplace, or if you're sitting watching a game and you're feeling this all of a sudden feeling of guilt, it's the wrong time. And you have to tell yourself, I have to push it away. Now is not the right time for me to have a feeling of guilt. And you actually set a date with yourself and saying, let's check in and I'll revisit this at a certain time. and you schedule it and allow that guilt to come. So we're not ignoring the guilt. We're telling the guilt now is not the time, because I'm in the middle of my workday, or I'm in the middle of my own whatever you're involved in, and it's not the time to feel guilty. You need to be in control of that feeling of guilt. And we'll have to see a little more why is it coming in the middle of the day? But in order to answer the question, I want to tell you the rationale of how we're going to answer this question of why is this an inappropriate place of guilt. So first, I want to ask you a question of 104, and I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. You could either listen to me or read it inside. Which of the following statements are true? Number 1, regret leads to change. Number 2, change leads to regret. Or number 3, it can work either way. Tell me an answer and tell me why. And whatever comes up, I'm curious to hear. Yes, let's hear.
Yeah, I want to answer, but first, I'm not sure I know what a negative emotion is or worry regarding spiritual matters. Is that like maybe you didn't fast on Yom Kippur and it's bothering you when you're at
Or
work?
you did a misdeed and you feel terrible for it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So let's see, anyone on Zoom want to give an answer to that?
Must be free.
It's
Are you
a hard
talking
one,
about
right?
the question for discussion?
Yes, the question for discussion. Which one is true? 1, 2, or 3?
For me, it's number 1, because regret can then allow you to live your life in a different way and make different choices. For me personally, I feel like if change leads to regret, it's kind of wallowing in self-pity, and you're looking at your current life and the present situation, and you're, worrying or feeling bad about something, and then going down that spiral, that negative spiral. So for me, I can understand that it would work either way, but I think it really depends on your mindset. And for me, the answer would be number 1.
Regret leads to change. Who agrees with Manny? Okay, we got 1 hand up. 2 hands up. We're making some headway here. Ken, what's your opinion? Number 3. So tell me why. So Ken is saying it could go either way, and I want to hear how or why.
Regret is certainly something that you can acquire at any time, and it can take you in any direction if you are aware that you're in that state and you want to change it. So it can go either way.
Okay. So the commonly held belief is like what Ken was saying and like what Maddie was saying, that regret can lead to change. The Alter Rebbe, or the Jewish way, the Tanya way, is telling you it never works that way. Regret will never lead you to change. I know.
Interesting.
We'll have to see why, but I think
Wow.
it's going to be a chiddush, which is the Hebrew word for the novelty, or what I like, or what JLI likes to call the aha moment. In every class, they guarantee a moment that you will learn something differently than your commonly held way, or the commonly understood understanding. And over here, a Jewish way is that regret, number 1, will never lead to change, which means number 1 is not the correct answer. Number 2, change will lead to regret. Let's see how that works. If you don't mind reading with me text number 12, or just following along. Before committing a wrong, all wrongdoers have reservations, and yet they are enticed to transgress. After committing the wrong, they regret their action. In Sefer Hasidim, it is said, the wicked are bursting with regrets. Let's be honest. We are all full of regrets. If regret would lead to change, you know who we will be? Tzaddikim, tzaddiks, the people from the previous course that we're not there, because we all have regrets. Why aren't we changed? We had Yom Kippur. We had a lot of regret on Yom Kippur. Why is it that when the next Yom Kippur comes, we're still in a place of regret? What change did it lead to? So the answer, there's a lot to talk. Let's hear Jennifer. We're going to watch a really cool video that I enjoyed.
I have a question back on page 96.
Yes.
Which is figure 33.1b.
Yes.
So we're just distinguishing between the word remorse and regret then. Here it says appropriate remorse leads to change.
Yes.
So now I'm confused.
I think we're interchanging. Regret, I didn't look up in a dictionary, but
But here
remorse
it
and regret,
says
is there a
it
big
needs to
difference
change,
between
and
them?
now
I
it's saying
think
it
they're
can't.
essentially the same.
Essentially the same. I think the
So
premise
why
of the
does it
course
say
is the
here
same.
That it leads to change, but here it says it can't.
Ah, we're,
confused.
yes, so very good. So let's watch the video. That's gonna be one of the main themes
Okay.
of, and thank you, Jennifer. It's gonna be answered. Let's watch the video. Okay, now, we're gonna make this loud just because my mic stopped working. So just to make sure everyone on Zoom, you guys will give me, let me know if you can hear the video well, okay? Make it a little louder first. Make sure we could get there. Oh, so just, I guess it's. Okay, we'll get back to there in a second. Are you guys able to hear? Yes, that's a yes.
Julie wanted to experience more of her Jewish heritage. She decided to start with some Shabbat observances, at least on Friday nights. She resolved to light Shabbat candles and have a Shabbat meal, pushing the mundane out of her mind for just one night a week. But as the sun was about to set that Friday afternoon, her doorbell rang. It was Sarah dropping by unexpectedly, and Shabbat was all but forgotten. The next morning, Shirley felt guilty about the speed with which her spiritual plans had unraveled. She resolved to do better, come what may. But life just continued to get in the way. Every few weeks, she would light Shabbat candles and enjoy a Shabbat meal, but it didn't happen often. Shirley grew frustrated, but also confused. On the one hand, she deeply regretted not following through with her Shabbat plan. But at the same time, her regret did not prevent her from repeating her mistake. But then again, it seldom does. We all make mistakes. We regret a lot of them. And we go ahead and repeat a lot of them as well, because despite our many regrets, we haven't changed. So why should our habits and inclinations? But is there a way to break out of the cycle? Actually, there is. While Shirley was dropping off her son for his bar mitzvah lessons, she met Rivka, the rabbi's wife. Rivka invited Shirley for a Shabbat meal. What an experience. Shabbat came alive in a wonderfully meaningful way. By the time Shirley left, she felt like a different person entirely. Thinking back, she felt terribly embarrassed at her inability to be consistent about lighting Shabbat candles and to free up an hour or so for a truly meaningful meal. But this time, her regret propelled her to results. She consistently implemented her Friday night program and enjoyed it tremendously. What happened? Well, her initial cycles of remorse could not affect real change because she had not changed and continued to waver between conflicting priorities. But Shabbat at the rabbi's home raised her to an entirely new perspective. She was now changed. And with that inner transformation, she finally broke free.
Okay, so let's explain this idea from the video. A person did something wrong yesterday and they regret it. You're essentially the same person that you were yesterday. You committed it yesterday. Today you regret it. My question to you is, why do you regret it? Well, it was the wrong thing to do. Okay, so why did you do it? If it wasn't so bad, why do you regret it? And the answer is because we're complex people. Yesterday, I was in a weaker place. Today, I'm repulsed by that type of behavior. The point that we're going to be trying to get to is real productive regret is not the cause of, but rather the result of a change in perspective. If you have a change in your perspective, then the regret that leads you to will actually be extremely productive. We'll take this slow. I want to explain it again. But if the regret is the first thing, and that is your impulse to change because you're feeling disgusting, it won't actually lead to a productive change. Let's illustrate this with a very common example. There's a fight in a relationship. He acts disrespectfully to his spouse. He feels bad for what he did. But guess what? It happens again. Many of us are familiar with that. He felt bad. Why did he do it again? The cycle continues. There's disrespect, there's regret, and then there's disrespect again. It just continues because nothing changed in the person. So therefore, the regret doesn't lead to a real place. But if the man really comes in his own mind to change his perspective, to truly appreciate his spouse, and to love his wife, the place that he is in, he realizes that there needs to be a boost. Then, if he comes to the perspective to respect his wife, and internally he works on making a change in his perspective in that relationship, and thinking these following words, how could I have said such a thing to someone who I love so much? How could I disrespect someone who I truly have so much respect for? If you're working on a change in your perspective, then the regret, the remorse, the regret that's going to come will actually bring to real change, and you won't speak that way anymore. But it comes first with a change in the perspective, and then it could lead to productive regret. So just to pull that up on the screen, let's see what that would look like. If regret comes first, it just repeats the same act. But that's unproductive. But if the change comes first, which means you have a change in your perspective, the realization and the work inside of change, which means it's going to be a productive side, then you'll come to regret. But that's an honest or genuine is the word we were saying before from the Tanya. That's a real regret. It's with the motivation you don't want to fail again. And that's a real, healthy, productive regret. That's how you could work on yourself when. So again, the common, as many of you were saying, the common way of understanding is regret comes first with the hope of change. But often that change doesn't come. It just repeats the same regret. A lot of times the regret makes you feel good about yourself. Going back to that text, Mrs. Naomi, that you had a question on. I think that was the text you had a question on.
In God.
So maybe it was a different one. But a lot of times it's actually the ploy of the evil inclination that the regret that you feel almost makes you feel, oh, I recovered. I did something bad. I regret it. That's almost like your apology. I feel bad for what I did. But that doesn't lead to change, and therefore it's going to happen again. The cycle will repeat itself. That's a toxic place because that's coming from the Yetzer Hara. If it's real change, which means, let's say in that argument with the spouses, where he realizes that that's not how he should be dealing with it. It should come from a place of respect for his wife. She may have upset him, and therefore he needs to talk to her, but not in a disrespectful way. The work has to happen from within him. Then if he said something disrespectfully, if the change of perspective happens first, then it would lead to real regret. And the same is true in our relationship with God. The only way to truly and meaningfully regret actions that we have done that have been hurtful in our relationship with God, which means to God, is by experiencing a closer relationship with him and having greater love for God. If you have a change in your perspective, which means you're feeling a more of an understanding of God and my relationship with God, like Maddie was saying before, that I need to work on our relationship. Then, and Maddie was quoting from the Maimonides, that you're in a place of wanting that change, then the regret that comes will be very productive. So going back to that slide, I just want to go back to the slide because I went a little bit quick through it. Let me just go back a second. If you're involved in mundane acts, it's not a place at that moment that you're going to be changing because you were the same person you were yesterday. So then the guilt is just coming from a place that's going to hold you down. But if it's coming when you're in middle of let's say in our relationship with God, you did something wrong with God, and then you're in the middle of prayer, you're having a change in perspective now. Your closeness with God is being developed, and therefore it's a place of real change. So, or if we could put the same thing, but if you're in a place of perspective of your spouse, that's in a healthy place that you're working, you're reflecting inside of you. Why would I have said something like that? I have such a deep respect for my spouse. At that moment, through that work, you're actually having a change in perspective. And therefore, the regret that happens will be a productive one. So if it's the middle of my day, whether you're watching a sports game or you're in the middle of work or you're riding a subway, whatever you're in the middle of doing at that moment, if a feeling of guilt comes up, you should know that it's not right now is not the right time. You should hold off on it and schedule a time, because change won't happen if you're feeling that regret in the middle of a day, because you're not changed from where you were when you committed that misdeed. We still have a lot we need to try to get to, and I'm going to try to keep it. So I'm saying over and over about a schedule. You have to schedule the time of that guilt. So I want to show you where this is coming from. If you look on page 107, so far we know that remorse needs to be over faulty choices, no, not over results. It needs to be productive and leads to change inside of you. And we also know that it also has to come from a change of perspective or a change of feelings inside of you. Then it could be a productive type of regret. We still need another part to it, and that's going to be text 13. It's from the same chapter of 26, and it says like this: regardless of whether the negative emotion happens upon us while we are involved in the service of God, studying or praying, we must realize that now is an inappropriate time for genuine remorse, even over, and tell me if I'm pronouncing this correctly, egregious, thank you. Egregious misdeeds, God forbid. For genuine remorse, we need designated times, appropriate times when we have calmness of mind. Elsewhere, it is clarified precisely when this time should be. So I want to explain, this is a very cool point. Regret needs to be postponed and has to be contained. You have to be in charge of allowing that feeling of guilt or that feeling of regret to be genuine, and it has to come at the right time. I just want to explain when this is. It's actually a cool time. In the olden days, there was something, let me give a little bit of background, because I don't want you guys to be doing this at home. But in the olden days, it would get dark, let's say in the winter at 5, 6 o'clock. They had candles, but how long would they light candles? A lot of times they would go to bed by 8 o'clock. They would be sleeping. So in the olden days, getting up in the middle of the night was a common practice by many deeply religious Jews. It was called Tikkun Chatzot. They would wake up at midnight and they would say prayers lamenting the destruction of the temple, the pogroms and persecutions, and lamenting exile, the fact that we are in a spiritual concealed state in our relationship with God. It was called Tikkun Chatzot. Our generation, we don't do it. So if you guys were planning to get up at midnight and go through this practice, it's not recommended, but it is recommended, according to the Rebbe, that to set aside a time. It could be once a month, it could be once a week. If you feel like you have a lot that you have to get off your shoulders, to work on getting through this, to have productive guilt. So if it's the middle of your day, it's not the right time, because it's not coming from a place of change of perspective. But if you designate a contained time, it could be a half an hour once a month, but it's a time that you are allowing yourself to feel that guilt that's coming from a place of desire to change and from a place of change of perspective. When that happens, it could be extremely productive. If you look at text 14, he actually explains when it is. Every night, either during the Tikkun Chatzot, which is the midnight prayer, or this is actually what we should be doing, is by the bedtime Shema. Many people have the custom of saying, it's a mitzvah, to say the Shema in the morning and the Shema in the evening. So before we retire for the night, many people I know in our community, they actually say the Shema in bed already. So they're in bed and they end the day with the Shema, which is almost like the constitution of Judaism, our oneness, in our belief in oneness of God, and more importantly, the reflection that we want to make at that moment, that if I have wronged you, I want to be in a better place. So whether it's to other people, and if in the Chabad prayer book, there's actually a paragraph we say every night that if I have wronged someone else, I am asking forgiveness. We have to see if it's enough just to ask for forgiveness from God. We'll save that for the end. But the idea where every night you're making a calculation to yourself, how was my day? So it could be once a week, it could be every night. But the point is that you are setting the time, and the focus is allowing productive results to come. So again, the guilt that you're feeling can't be for the sake of the guilt, because that's coming from your self-oriented soul that makes you feel good from having that feeling. I took care of it. I feel guilty. I'm good. No, the guilt is only appropriate if it's leading to change and it's leading you to a better place. To do that, you have to designate the time in order to make that happen. Let's look at the 109 now. Now we have an extra line. So appropriate remorse is only over moral faulty choice. That's the first lesson we learned today. It has to be on a decision that was wrong, or like Robin was saying, it wasn't a reasonable decision that you made, and it has to be productive, which means it has to be leading you to a place of heightened joy. It has to be leading you to a place of change. And number 3, it has to be a result of genuine change of perspective. And number 4, it has to be controlled and it has to be limited. You can't walk around feeling guilty. That's not healthy, and that's toxic. One of the themes of the course is that we're getting ourselves in a positive place. We're trying to leave those negative emotions. So even a negative emotion like guilt, which is appropriate at times, it's not to be your default place. So you designate times to allow that guilt to lead you to a better place. So Jennifer's question from a few minutes ago is, when is the change happening, right? So the goal, it has to come from a place of change of perspective. If a person is thinking about their loved one or their friend that they hurt, they think about them, and it leads them to a change of perspective, which will allow the regret to be appropriate. It will allow the regret to be legitimate and allow it to grow. But the result of it leads you to a better place. Meaning there's a change of perspective that has to happen first, but then there's a change of character that happens to you after. The change of character is you change how you talk to them. It has to lead you internally to a place of heightened joy. If you wronged God, you can't walk around feeling guilty over it. The guilt is allowed to come if it's designated time, like Maddie was saying, like that time of teshuvah. But the result is that it brings you to a place of joy. Or like what King Solomon was saying, in every sadness, there is a benefit. It has to lead you to a place of joy, a change of character. Does that make sense, Jennifer? Mm-hmm. Okay, so, and the last point, I think this is, hopefully will be the last one, because I know I want to try to finish in the next few minutes. I just want to make sure on the screen. So again, it might be a little bit of a review, but there's a lot of points that I'm trying to get through. Remember I told you at the beginning, it's the first question in the Tanya, and the whole Tanya is like answering this question. We're focusing on one chapter, but there's still a lot to go through. So it has to be the result of a genuine change. Oops, I think I went, yeah, here we go. It has to be a genuine change. And all regret needs to be postponed. That's a calendar, and it has to be contained. You can't just have your entire night feeling guilty. It's you're designating half an hour that you are in control of. It's a contained place, which means it's not when you're by the apples of Safeway and all of a sudden this feeling of guilt overtakes you and you're in tears. That's the place, that's the Yetzer Hara getting the better of you. Right now, that's a toxic place to have that feeling, because it's not coming from a place of change of perspective. You were looking between Macintosh and Fuji apples. You're not going to be making a change, right, Ken? Okay, so you do it by the bedtime Shema, and it has to be a limited time. Okay, so now, but there's a drawback. When you're at the apple aisle of Safeway, right? I think, Rita, I saw you at Safeway. and you were complimenting me on the menorah, or you sent me a picture from the
Yes.
Safeway in Ave. So you're familiar with the Apple aisle and Safeway, but if you're not going to take it during the when you have that feeling of guilt, a lot of times it's just you didn't feel you may not feel guilty tonight. So take it while it comes. So a drawback of setting aside time for it is you may not have that feeling of guilt anymore. What if I no longer feel guilty, right, David? Is that what you agree with that? And how do I move on if I want it to be contained? How do I make sure to allow it to continue? So what needs to happen is the contemplation. So I did that. So let's read text 15 that will answer our questions. During those designated times, we should reflect upon these are the words of Tanya. I want to see how we could understand these words from chapter 26. We should reflect upon the greatness of God against whom we have sinned, and therefore thereby cause our hearts to be truly broken and genuinely embittered. So we're going to break this apart for a moment. There's two types of guilt. There's a guilt against something you did wrong to God, a sin that was committed, and there's a guilt for feeling that you wronged another. Right? So those are two feelings of guilt. I'm going to go through both of them based on this text. The worry is, how do I move on? How do I know I was forgiven? And how do I make sure that that guilt will come? If we have the perspective that change causes remorse or regret, if I have that genuine feeling of change, of perspective, the regret will be appropriate and will be productive. And I just want to get to the point over here. It has to be, I'm trying to get the right word. If it's self-centered, it's not going to be real change. It has to be other-centered, which means if you wronged another, the change can't be about how bad I am. It has to be how I wronged that person. And then you are able to move on from that place of guilt. This is a very important thing. And a lot of people get stuck in guilt because you don't know if you were ever forgiven. And therefore you remain in a place of guilt. What I want to try to get to is, it might be easier to talk about the guilt I feel of something I did to God. It just might be easier to start with that. Let's see it on. If it's a self-centered remorse, it's not going to lead you to the result you want to see. What I mean by that is, you know, the person who's on a date, and he's so self-centered. So he's talking to his prospective bride, his girl on the date, and he's talking about everything, his career choices and his childhood and his education and his travels. He's talking about everything about his life. And then he feels he's spoken too much. So he says, enough about me. What do you think of me? So it's all self-centered. The point of the guilt is not about how bad or how wrong what you did. It's about how you wronged the other person. If you think of it in a relationship with a spouse, if you said the wrong thing and you come to your spouse after and you say, oh my gosh, I'm such a bad person, I say such bad things, that's not really helpful for your spouse because it's about you. If you want it to be helpful, it's not about the self-centeredness of it, it's about the other person. So if a person, let's say, wronged God, go back to that text now, think about God who you sinned, and cause our hearts to be truly embittered. When you have that feeling, you should know that God forgives you. Meaning because you're in a place of change at that moment. Let's just see that on the screen. If you say, I am bad, that's self-centered. Other-centered, which could either mean God over here, or it could be another person. My behavior was hurtful to others. That is other-centered guilt. That is productive, and that you should be able to graduate from, which means you shouldn't remain in that place of guilt. If you look at this Hasidic master on text 16, when repenting, and again, this part is about feeling guilt against something you did against God. So on 111, it says, when repenting, our regret and bitterness should be over the fact that we have provoked the Creator and anguished Him. For our sins caused the exile of the divine presence. Okay, fine. Remorse is not supposed to be about the harm that you've inflicted, but about the pain that you caused the other or God. So this would be the final part. Text, if you read with me on 112, appropriate remorse, we're just adding one more part to it. It has to be controlled, but number 5 is it's about the offended and not the offending party, meaning it's about the other person. And therefore, as soon as you accomplish that, you have to be able to move on. In English, there's a beautiful term called a clean slate. If you're in a relationship with God, you should know that if you did proper teshuvah, which means if you have proper remorse and guilt over a past misdeed, and you genuinely have a change of perspective, and you genuinely have that regret, and it's in the right place with a controlled time, and going through this list, it leads you to change. And that's when you know that you are forgiven, that you can't remain in that place of guilt anymore. Or to use that English term, you have a clean slate. It's a little trickier with other people because people are complicated. And because with God, you could rest assured that God forgives you. Because you could wrong God over and over, and God could still forgive. But another person it's much harder to secure a forgiveness. And that's what I just want to end the class with. And just one more thing about God. Ken, you were here on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is a time that we pray, we're fasting, obviously. And Burgers, you definitely know this from many, many years of attending Yom Kippur at Chabad. You would know that at the end of Yom Kippur, right before we sound the shofar, in Chabad synagogues, we sing a very joyful melody at the conclusion of Yom Kippur. We just fasted 25 hours. We prayed a bunch. We tapped with our fist on our chest. And yet at the end, we culminate the entire experience of Yom Kippur with a very joyful song. Because that's our way of saying that the somberness stops. And now we graduate to a place of joy. We can't allow that guilt to linger. Yes, there's a place of remorse, and we have to ask for forgiveness. But then there has to be a point where it's controlled, contained. That was the appropriate place and the appropriate time. And now we feel that we have a clean slate. If we were genuine in it, Hashem will forgive us. Is that clear? Mm-hmm. But about people is obviously a little more complicated, and that's what I just want to end the class with, about interpersonal relationships, which will be the final part. Chances are, if you are genuinely remorseful and you go to that person and ask for forgiveness, they will grant it to you. It has to come from a place of genuine and sincere remorse. And it's just very interesting. No matter how much you pray to God to forgive you, if your misdeed was not against God, but against another person, forgiveness won't work in a prayer book. Forgiveness has to work by communicating with that person and asking for forgiveness. It could be the hardest thing. As kids, Erev Yom Kippur, we had like 27 kids in my class, and everyone, do you forgive me? Do you forgive me? Do you forgive me? It was almost how we saw other people doing, that if you really want to secure forgiveness, it's not enough to go in a prayer book. If you wronged someone, you have to go to that person and ask for forgiveness. Now, if you're going with a real, genuine care, which means a remorse for what you did, but before that remorse came that change, that I value our relationship, value our friendship, why would I have done that? And it's genuine, then chances are the remorse that you go to them with will be genuine too, and they will accept it. They not always will accept it, and there's actually a law that talks about how many times you have to go to them if they're saying no to your request of forgiveness. How many times do you think?
3. 9.
3. 3, very good, Ken. 3 times. And if they don't, you could stop asking for forgiveness because you did your job. You did it the best you can. So if you look at, let's just end with this text on on page 114. One who injures another is obligated to make restitution in 5 ways. So I hurt someone, whether physically or emotionally. There's 5 things that you have to pay them back. The attacker must pay actual damages and also pay the pain inflicted, medical bills, loss of employment, and number 5, humiliation. 5 things you got to pay back. But look at the next paragraph. Even if the attacker makes these payments, God does not grant atonement until the offender implores the victim for forgiveness. You got to go to them and talk, and your remorse has to count. Okay, so now we're just going to conclude. So it has to be focused on the offended party. It has to be God-centered, God forgives. If it's about interpersonal, it's a little more complicated. And again, it's over a morally faulty choice, not a result. That was from the beginning of the past. It has to be productive. It has to be a place of genuine change, meaning the change leads to that feeling of regret. And it has to be limited, controlled, and it has to be on the other-centered, the offended party. Offenses against God, true change and remorse is sufficient because God will forgive you. But if against another person, you can have the nicest flowers. You can say, I'm sorry, but you still need to go to them and make amends. Forgiveness is guaranteed on Yom Kippur if you show up, or really any day of the year. But with another person, they may not accept it. So it's not guaranteed. And you have to try again up to 3 times. So this is, we're going to wrap up. If you look, this is like a massive map they made just to be able to understand tonight's class. I found this really cool. We're going to end with this. If you look on page 115, which is figure 3.2, resolving guilt. Obviously, you have books, so you can bring this home. I just want to show you how this navigates. We'll start at the top left, which you see that box where it says, the feeling is I feel regret over something I did. You guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. So now your question is this regret appropriate, right? That was the question we had at the beginning of tonight. So let's see. Did you make a morally faulty decision? So the answer, let's say the answer is yes. Then you have to continue going down. Is this regret a product of a changed perspective, meaning it's genuine, it's coming from a truly changed you? If the answer is no, then warning. This is toxic regret. If it's not coming from a place of a changed perspective, the regret will just bog you down and it's toxic. Get rid of it. Move your mind elsewhere. Revisit your indiscretion during a contained pre-bedtime remorse session. You see that? How we're going down?
Yeah.
And then begin the remorse session thinking about the pain or harm you've caused your fellow or God, meaning depending on who. Make sure that this is not about feeling bad about yourself. If it's about yourself, that's not a place of guilt that you want to be in. We have to make it about the other person or God that you have wronged. So we're just going to, let's just go back up to where it says yes. If it's coming from a truly changed you, we're jumping up 3 boxes here. If it is coming from a truly changed you, if the answer is yes, that's great. This has the potential to be productive remorse or guilt. Nevertheless, even though it's coming from a place of a changed perspective, it's the middle of prayer and you wrong God and you're really feeling into it, still you should postpone the feelings to a contained pre-bedtime Shema remorse session. Anyway, you could continue that. I don't want to take too much more of your time. But the last thing I just want to end with is all this is to the theme of the course was moving away from the self-oriented paradigm, the self-oriented perspective, and putting ourselves more from the perspective of the divine soul, having that God or mission-oriented self. And the same is also true with guilt and remorse. If you're focusing on the other, it will allow you to move on because you're going to have a change of perspective. You're going to ask for forgiveness from that person after that feeling of guilt. So the change leads to that guilt, and that guilt will lead you to a positive place. But if it's not coming from that, you should know that it's actually coming from the self-oriented soul, just trying to bog you down, and it won't lead you to a good ending. Okay, we'll stop with that. Let's just bring this. So the rationale of this evening was the area we're trying to focus on is guilt and remorse. If we have the divine soul model, which is the theme of the course, going from being a worrier to being a warrior, The feelings of remorse are controlled and purposeful, and it leads you to a place of greater joy. Let's just see. So you have that deflated balloon, which I think is a great theme. Like, in the advertisements, it was a deflated balloon. How does one distinguish between productive and unproductive guilt, which was the question we had all the way at the beginning? So there was, let me just move that. I don't know if on the screen you'll be able to see so well, but you have to see if it's coming from this is just a recap. If it's coming from a morally faulty choice, then the guilt is appropriate. If it's coming from a bad result, it's not an appropriate guilt. You have to get rid of it. Put your mind into something else. It has to come from a productive place, which means it leads you to a positive emotion, a place of joy, and it leads you to a place of change. It has to come from a result of genuine change, which means one of the big interesting things we spoke about this evening is if regret comes first, the change will never really happen, because we all regret and we do it again. It has to come from a change of perspective, and then the regret could be a genuine one. It has to have a controlled or contained time, and it has to be other-centered or on the offended party, whether God or a person, and not about you. This is still, this still needs clarification. What point can you forgive yourself and move on? So if your perspective was always it was hurtful to others, if you change your perspective and therefore really change through that guilt, God will forgive you, and the other person, you should go to them and ask for forgiveness. But it's coming from the place that you're not thinking about, you know what, I want to get over this feeling, let me talk to them. That's coming from a self-centered place. It has to come from the place of thinking of the other. We're going to, let's just see the recap.
Lesson 3.
Make it
Rethinking regret. 1. Negative emotions, even when valid and appropriate, are never a goal unto themselves. They are merely bridges to the benefit that follows: increased joy and positive emotion. 2. It is vital that our ordinary routine runs exclusively on positive emotions. All regret and remorse must therefore be postponed for the pre-bedtime hour and contained time-wise. 3. The concept of remorse is often mired in moral confusion, whereby we confuse for piety feelings that are actually toxic and expressions of self-centeredness. Remorse that flows from an unhealthy place cannot lead to a positive result, but merely perpetuates the negativity of its source. 4. These are the guidelines for legitimate, productive remorse. A. Remorse is appropriate only for something that legitimately calls for remorse, such as a faulty decision, but not a faulty result, because we can only control our decisions, not the results. B. Remorse must directly lead to increased positive emotion. C. Remorse must trigger a change in subsequent behavior. D. Remorse is not a catalyst for true change. Rather, productive remorse is a product of a shift in feelings and perspective, a changed you. E. Healthy remorse is other-centered, caused by reflecting on how you have wronged God or your fellow, not self-centered, reflecting on how terrible you are. 5. Guilt and remorse are countered through living a life aligned with our divine soul.
Okay, and God willing, next week, same place and time, Monday evening, when God throws us lemons, how do we remain in an upbeat or positive attitude when things around us are not going well, when our life seems to be taking a turn that we're not happy about? So we'll explore methods and a shift in our internal perspectives, how to make sure the sun shines in our lives despite reality of, God forbid, suffering that we may be going through. That'll be, God willing, next week. If anyone has questions, I would love to hear. I just also want to make sure, is everyone getting